Throughout the 90s, mostly, at least in toy stores, Masters of the Universe was dead. That was until 2001. Welcome back to the Junk Room, everybody. It's me, the Junkman, coming back at you with another video. And everybody's talking about Masters of the Universe, He-Man. He-Man's on everybody's tongue now and is back. Not only do we have two different Netflix shows, one currently on Netflix now and another one coming soon that's more aimed toward kids. He-Man is back everywhere. There's retro style figures, kind of like a new retro look. I really like those, although every time I walk into a Walmart, there's gobs and gobs of Skeletor He-Man, maybe an Evil Lyn. Can't find a Trap Jaw, the only one I would buy. And then, of course, you got Funko Pops with their He-Man collection. Saw some little He-Man keychains. He-Man, or Masters Universe, just call it He-Man for short. It's everywhere. It's back. It's as popular now as probably it was in the 80s, or very darn close to it. And you can't go a line while seeing people passionate about the new He-Man, upset about the new He-Man, indifferent about the new He-Man, and probably other people just scratching their heads saying, what are these adults yelling about a cartoon? But hey, we're passionate fans, right? Well, in the 80s, the He-Man toys died out. Around 1986, there was almost overnight, the sales went down. I mean, the bottom dropped out of them. And no, it wasn't because Mattel had released She-Ra a year before. I did a whole video about the fall of the He-Man toy line in the 80s. Check that out. I'll link to it at the end of this video. But in the 80s, other than probably Star Wars, I don't think there were as big of a toy line as the Masters of the Universe line. Of course, in 1987, they tried to do a live-action movie to bring a little bit more pulse into the dying line. But it was a little late. If you ask me, that He-Man movie should have been better, of course, but should have came out a few years before, around 84, 85. And if it was a better movie, I think they would have had the He-Man line going at least until the end of the 80s. Well, Mattel didn't want He-Man to die completely out, so in 1989, they relaunched a new He-Man cartoon series and a new toy line. Now, a lot of people kind of forget about this line. You could call it a flop, but it wasn't a flop. I mean, sure, it didn't have the success of the original early 80s He-Man line, but it lasted until 1992, and that's a long time for an action figure line. But after that, it seemed like everything was dead when it came to He-Man. In the 90s, you really hardly didn't see anything related to He-Man. In 1995, of course, Hasbro relaunched its Star Wars line to huge success. And I'm sure it made Mattel scratch their head and say, look, here's Hasbro taking this line, releasing it in 1995 when there was no movie to help push the toy sales, making it one of the biggest toy sales in 1995. Mattel had to take notice. But you know, with Star Wars, a lot of the kids that grew up on Star Wars were just a little older than the He-Man Master Universe fans. So Mattel knew they probably had to wait a few more years to where those collectors were a little older. And because we are talking the 90s here, when we had the collector boom of the 90s. Adults, at least 20-year-olds, were really starting to collect action figures. Of course, that's not going to push huge sales, but it sure does help, especially if those collectors have kids they want to pass on their love for. So 2000 came, and it was time for Hasbro to put some more life back into He-Man. After all, they were planning to relaunch the He-Man line with a new toy line and a new TV series in 2002. But they had to build up hype for He-Man. They had to get the people that grew up with He-Man back interested in He-Man Masters of the Universe, and hopefully, if they had kids, sell them on the new He-Man. What better way to get adult collectors into buying He-Man figures than re-releasing the ones that they released in the 80s? Yeah, back before retro was cool, Mattel was ahead of the game, and they released retro He-Man figures. And these are, as you know, Hasbro's been doing the retro Star Wars line, although the figures look about the same, and the card here and there looks the same, the back's different. No, Mattel didn't care about that. Mattel released these as they were. They look just like the originals, except for little touches here and there. It's like on the back of the card. It looks like the original card. Take note, Hasbro. Except where it has the copyright dates, they did add a 2000 and 2001 copyright date, and a little bit more information on the back of the card is a little different. But at first glance, not only does the figure look just like the figure you had as a kid, The package looks just like the package you had as a kid. Missing that ring. You remember when He-Man figures came with rings? I forgot all about that. He-Man figures, at least I know Trapjaw came with a ring because I had it and I wore it with pride. Now I remember when these hit. I only remember seeing these at Toys R Us. Now I know they did exclusive with JCPenney's, a box set, but I don't remember seeing these at Walmart or Target, anywhere else. Now this was a limited line, 15,000 for each one release. That's a lot. I don't know if you can call that limited, but Mattel did. I can remember walking into Toys R Us, and I don't know if I probably read about this in Action Figure News or something like that, but seeing it, I was blown away. I was like, oh man. Now these were figures. They were released on the card, the vintage style card, but then that card was placed in a collector's box, which is pretty cool because you could have it, you know, you didn't have to take it out of the box to admire it. It was really cool. It looked really good. Now they were a little pricey if I remember right, reaching up to almost $20 in 2000, which is not as unheard of as it was back then. But I can remember these showing up at Toys R Us, and about the time they showed up, they were gone. They were really hard to find. Now let's look at the ones that got released. First up, JCPenney's did an exclusive 10-figure box set, and this was pretty cool because the box kind of looked like Castle Grayskull. I think that's what they were going for. They could have made it look a little better or more green to look like Castle Grayskull, but overall, it's a pretty cool collector's box. There was 2 different 5-packs released. Both 5-packs came with Battle Armor Skeletor and Battle Armor He-Man, along with Zodak and Clawful. But one exclusive 5-pack came with a Mossman, and the other one came with an exclusive Prince Adam. In Series 1, there were 10 figures. There was Beastman. That's right, the orange werewolf got his own figure. And there was the He-Man look-alike but blue, Faker. Now, of course, you couldn't do any line without Men-at-Arms, so you got a Men-at-Arms figure. And there was the controversial Teela, at least controversial today. You had one of my favorites as a kid, Triclops. Spin his little head around to show different eyes. And of course they did Trapjaw, one of my favorite figures of all time. They did Skeletor and He-Man, along with the other man of the line, Merman. Can you believe the new cartoon series made Merman cool? I can't either. And we can't forget Evelyn. Of course there was a Skeletor release with Panther and a He-Man release with Battle Cat, although I always called it Cringer. So this line sold pretty well. Mattel was happy with the sales, and early in the following year, 2001, Series 2 hit stores. In that series, they had Battle Armor He-Man, and of course, a Battle Armor Skeletor. Also released in that line was a Buzz-Off. But that wasn't all. You also had the Red Clawful that looked like he worked at Red Lobster, Stratos, probably one of the worst figures in the He-Man line, and the Zodiac guy, or however you say his name. Now these were pretty awesome because again, the card looked just like the vintage card, take note Hasbro, and the figures looked exactly like they did back in the old days. Of course, collectors are worried it's going to ruin the value of the originals, but no, it never did. Just like people said the retro one would ruin the value of Star Wars figures, and it never did. Just like people said that gift pack they did of vintage figures in the 90s would ruin the vintage line, it didn't at all. Just like people said in 95, when Hasbro decided to use the same molds for the Star Wars ships, they said it was going to ruin the value of the Star Wars ship in the vintage line, but it didn't. Every few years we get told the toy companies are going to ruin the value of your old toys. It never happens. In fact, it seems to make them more popular. And these right here are still pretty popular. They're still pretty collectible, where you can find them for about $50 to $80 on eBay, sometimes going into the hundreds depending on what figure it is and of course condition. Nowadays everything is retro, but this was one of the first toy lines to really push a retro line, re-releasing what they did in the 80s, and overall fans were pretty happy with this line if they could find them. I think being limited made this line better. Sure, if you were looking for it, it made it a little hard to find them all, but they didn't overflood the market with them, and that's always a good thing also. It's always good to find that balance of not sending too much or not sending anything at all. And if there's one company that knows about not sending anything at all, it's Hasbro. But this was Mattel, and Mattel got it right. Although it does look like they were overshipped He-Man and Skeletor in that new retro line. Anyway, do you remember this line released in 2000 and 2001? Did you collect them? Did you buy them? Could you even find them? And do you have a Trapjaw that you'll give me? I love Trapjaw. That would be good. Have a Trapjaw from every series ever released. Well, that's it. Maybe next time we'll look at the wacky time the He-Man figures teamed up with DC comic book figures. I still don't understand who came up with that one. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. Did you have this line? What did you think of it? And until the next video, thumb up so you like my content, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk again soon.
Junkman.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.